My name is Elias Morgan. I never knew my father. He died before I took my first breath. A factory accident. That's what they told me. A machine failed. A moment passed, and my father was gone. To the world, he was just another worker. To my mother, he was everything. She carried me alone. Grief in her chest. Hope in her womb. When I was born, there was no celebration, no proud father holding me, only my mother's tired smile and eyes that had already cried too much. For 5 years, she was my entire world. She worked wherever she could, cleaned houses, washed clothes, cooked for strangers. At night, she held me close and whispered stories about a man I would never meet. He would have loved you, she said. He would have been proud. I believed her. At 5 years old, I still thought my mother was unbreakable. Then she got sick. At first, it was just a cough, then weakness, then silence. Hospitals were expensive, doctors were distant, time was cruel. One night, she didn't wake up. I remember shaking her arm, calling her name, waiting for her eyes to open. They never did. That morning, I became alone. At the funeral, people cried quietly. Some looked at me with pity. Others avoided my eyes. My uncles stood together. My father's brothers. They spoke softly, too softly. They said they would take care of me. They said family never abandons its own. I believed them. I went to live in their house. It was large, clean, full of rules. At first, they were kind. They bought me clothes, fed me well, but kindness faded quickly. I was reminded every day that I was not their child. Earn your place, one of them said. I didn't understand what that meant. Soon, I did. At 7, I started cleaning floors. At 8, washing dishes. At 9, running errands. They called it teaching responsibility. I called it survival. Their children went to school in clean uniforms. I wore their old clothes. They ate first. I ate what was left. If I complained, I was told I should be grateful. You would be nothing without us, my uncle said once. Those words stayed with me. School was my only escape. I loved books, numbers, questions with clear answers, but even that didn't last. At 12, they pulled me out of school. Education is expensive, they said. You can learn more by working. From that day on, I became invisible. I woke up before everyone else, cleaned, worked, obeyed. I slept late, tired, quiet. Sometimes, at night, I thought about my mother. About her voice, about the life she wanted for me. I wondered if she would recognize me now. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation. He's lucky, my uncle said. We could have sent him away. Lucky. That word burned. I realized something that day. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as labor. Free. Replaceable. That night, I made a promise. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't tell anyone. But I promised myself this. One day, I would leave that house. One day, I would become so strong that no one could ever reduce me to nothing again. Revenge didn't come to me as anger. It came as clarity. I began to observe how money moved, how my uncles talked about business, how deals were made. They underestimated me. That was their mistake. They thought silence meant weakness. It didn't. It meant preparation. I learned numbers while counting inventory, negotiation while listening from doorways, power while being ignored. Every insult became fuel. Every order became a lesson. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning. They never noticed. To them, I was still just the boy who owed them his life. They didn't know something important. I was building one, and when the time came, I would make sure they understood exactly what they had created. By the time I turned 13, I no longer asked questions. Questions led to explanations. Explanations led to anger. Anger led to punishment. So I stayed quiet. Silence became my shield. My uncle's house was always busy. Guests came and went. Business partners laughed loudly in the living room while I stood in the corner holding trays. No one looked at me. And that was exactly how I learned everything. I learned which uncle made decisions, which one only followed, who lied confidently, who panicked under pressure. They spoke freely around me. They forgot I was listening. At 14, my responsibilities doubled. I woke up before sunrise, cleaned the yard, prepared breakfast, ironed clothes. Then I worked at my uncle's warehouse, carrying boxes, sorting goods, counting inventory. My hands hardened, my back ached, my mind sharpened. I noticed patterns others ignored. Which suppliers were unreliable, which products sold faster, which employees stole quietly. I said nothing. At night, I borrowed old newspapers and business magazines from the trash. I taught myself how markets worked, how profit was calculated, how failure happened. I learned that money wasn't magic. It was structure. One evening, my cousin asked me why I worked so hard. "You're not even getting paid." He laughed. I looked at him and said nothing. He didn't understand. I wasn't working for money. I was working for information. At 16, something changed. One of my uncles lost a major deal, a mistake, a miscalculation. The house was tense. Arguments echoed through the walls. That night, I stayed up late organizing inventory records. I noticed the error immediately. A supplier overcharged. No one verified. The next morning, I spoke, carefully, respectfully. "There's a mistake in the numbers," I said. They stared at me. I showed them the records. Silence filled the room. My uncle corrected the issue. Saved money, saved face. That day, they looked at me differently. Not with kindness, with caution. From then on, they trusted me with more responsibility. Accounts, invoices, deliveries. But not respect, never respect. "You should be grateful," one uncle reminded me. "We're giving you work." I nodded. Inside, something hardened. By 18, I had no childhood left. No friends. No memories worth keeping. Only discipline. One night, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. My uncles were discussing my future. "He's useful," one said, "but we shouldn't let him get ideas." "He's family," another replied, "but not our blood." The words settled in my chest like stones. They never planned to let me rise. They planned to keep me exactly where I was, a servant who knew his place. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I planned. I began saving small amounts of money secretly. Coins, loose bills. I hid them where no one would look. I also began preparing myself mentally. I practiced restraint, patience, control. At 20, I asked to take night classes. They laughed. "Why? So you can leave us?" I didn't answer. They refused. So I educated myself another way. I listened, I observed, I memorized. I learned contracts by reading discarded paperwork, accounting by fixing their mistakes, negotiation by watching them fail. I learned one critical lesson. They had money, but they had no vision. At 22, I started making small moves, suggesting changes, recommending suppliers, improving systems. Profits increased. They took credit. I didn't mind. Credit was temporary. Control was permanent. By 25, the business depended on me, not officially, but functionally. If I stopped working, everything slowed. They didn't realize how dangerous that was. To them, one evening, my oldest uncle spoke sharply to me. "Don't forget who you are," he said. "You belong here because we allow it." I looked at him calmly. "Yes," I said. That night, I made my final decision. I would not run away. I would not confront them. I would outgrow them. I would build something they couldn't control, something they couldn't touch. And when the time came, they wouldn't even realize that the boy they raised as a servant had already surpassed them. Revenge, I understood now, was not about destruction. It was about replacement. And my time was coming. By the time I turned 27, I had mastered one thing perfectly: control without recognition. The business my uncles ran looked successful from the outside. New vehicles, bigger contracts, respect in the neighborhood. But inside, it was fragile. Every system depended on me. Inventory, accounts, supplier communication, damage control, they never noticed. People rarely notice foundations. I was still treated like help, still ordered around, still reminded of my place. And that was my advantage. Because when people believe you are powerless, they never guard themselves against you. I began preparing my exit quietly. No announcements, no drama, just precision. I started networking without them knowing. Drivers, suppliers, warehouse workers, people they underestimated. I learned who was unhappy, who was underpaid, who was waiting for an opportunity. I didn't promise anything. I listened. At night, I studied relentlessly. Business law, market behavior, risk management. I saved aggressively, not in banks, in assets. Small investments under different names. Nothing traceable. At 29, I made my first independent move. A small trading deal. Low risk. High turnover. I executed it using contacts I had built over years. It worked. Then another. Then another. I never touched my uncle's money. Never stole. Never cheated. Everything I built was clean. Because I wanted my revenge to be untouchable. One evening, a supplier called me directly. They don't respect agreements, he said. But you do. That was the moment I knew. Trust had shifted. People no longer trusted the name of the family. They trusted me. Slowly, contracts began bypassing my uncle's. Not intentionally. Naturally. When deals went wrong, people called me. When negotiations stalled, people asked for me. My uncles noticed the change. They grew suspicious. "You're getting too confident," one said. "Remember your position." I nodded. Inside, I smiled. Because confidence was no longer something they could take from me. At 30, I made the hardest decision of my life. I left. No arguments. No accusation. I thanked them. They laughed. "You won't survive on your own," they said. "You owe everything to us." I didn't respond. I walked away with nothing visible. Nuka. No property. Just knowledge. Reputation. And connections. The first year alone was brutal. No safety net. No backup. I slept in a small room above a warehouse. Worked 14 hours a day. Sometimes 18. There were moments I doubted myself. Moments when hunger reminded me of childhood. Moments when loneliness felt heavier than poverty. But quitting was not an option, because quitting would mean they were right. By 32, my business stabilized. Small office, few employees, all loyal because I treated them as humans, not tools. By 35, growth accelerated. Investors approached me. They saw discipline, integrity, consistency, things my uncles never had. Then the moment came. A major contract. One my uncles had been chasing for years. They lost it. I won it. Not because I tried to hurt them, but because I was better prepared. News spread quickly. Whispers turned into conversations. How did he do it? He came from nothing. He used to work for them. My uncles contacted me, first politely, then urgently. They wanted partnership. I declined, calmly, respectfully, without emotion. That hurt them more than anger ever could. Years passed. My company expanded internationally. Offices, assets, affluence. I dressed well, spoke little, listened more. I never bragged, because success doesn't need noise. One evening, I stood outside a building bearing my company's name. Glass walls, bright lights. I remembered a small boy cleaning floors, carrying boxes. Being invisible, that boy survived. Not because someone saved him, but because he refused to break. Revenge was no longer my motivation. Justice was. I didn't destroy my uncles. I outgrew them, and that was something they would have to live with for the rest of their lives. Success changes how the world looks at you, but it doesn't change where you came from. By the time I turned 40, my name carried weight. Not because I demanded respect, because I earned it. My company had grown beyond borders. New markets, new partners, new power. People listened when I spoke, and that was when the past decided to knock. It started quietly. A message from an old employee, then a call from a former supplier. "They're struggling," they said. "Your uncles." I felt nothing at first. No joy, no anger. Just confirmation. Mismanagement. Ego. Outdated thinking. Everything I once tried to fix, they ignored. Now it was breaking them. Then one evening, I received a letter, handwritten, from the oldest uncle. The same man who once told me I belonged only because he allowed it. The letter was short, humble. "Careful." He asked for a meeting. I didn't reply immediately. I waited, not out of cruelty, out of control. Weeks later, I agreed. We met in a neutral place, a small office, no luxury, no dominance. When they walked in, I barely recognized them. Older, heavier, tired. Their confidence was gone. They looked at me differently now. Not as a servant, as a solution. "We made mistakes," one of them said. I stayed silent, "We underestimated you," another added. Still silent. They explained their situation, debts, lawsuits, contracts collapsing. Then came the request. They wanted help, investment, guidance, rescue. They spoke nervously, as if afraid I might stand up and leave. I listened patiently. When they finished, the room felt heavy. I finally spoke. "I owe you nothing," I said calmly. Their faces tightened. "But," I continued, "I don't need revenge anymore." That confused them. "I learned everything about survival in your house," I said. "Pain taught me discipline. Humiliation taught me patience. Neglect taught me independence." They avoided my eyes. "I won't save your business," I said, "but I will offer you dignity." I made them an offer. I would buy their company. Legally, cleanly. They would keep positions, salaries, but not control. The silence was deafening. They had no choice. They agreed. Within months, the deal was complete. Ownership transferred, systems restructured, losses stabilized. The business survived, but it was no longer theirs. Employees noticed the change immediately. Fair wages, clear rules, respect. Productivity rose, loyalty returned. I never visited the office. I didn't need to. Power doesn't require presence. One afternoon, I visited the old house, the same house where I once slept on the floor. It felt smaller now, quieter. My uncles lived there still. They invited me inside, offered tea. Their hands shook slightly. We talked about simple things: health, weather, time. No accusation, no apologies. They didn't ask for forgiveness. They knew better. Before leaving, the oldest uncle said something unexpected. "You were never weak," he said quietly. "We were blind." I nodded. That was enough. As I walked away, I felt something release inside me, a weight I had carried since childhood. Revenge had transformed. It was no longer about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. That night, I stood alone in my office. City lights below, I thought of my mother, of a father I never knew, of a child who had nothing. I whispered a promise. I survived, and for the first time in my life, I believed it completely. Power is quiet when it is complete. By the time I reached 50, my name no longer needed explanation. I was no longer introduced. I was expected. Boards waited for my decision. Markets reacted to my silence. People studied my past, trying to understand how someone with nothing built everything. They never understood the truth. The story did not begin with ambition. It began with loss. I never forgot the man who died before I was born. A father I never heard speak. A face I knew only through stories. I never forgot my mother either. Her warmth, her voice. She held my hand when the world still made sense. Then she disappeared. And I learned early that love does not last forever, but memory does. As my success grew, something inside me shifted. Revenge no longer fueled me. Survival no longer motivated me. Responsibility did. I created scholarship programs quietly. Orphan education funds, mentorship networks. I never attached my name because I knew what it felt like to be helped conditionally. I wanted children like me, to grow without debt to humiliation. One evening, my assistant brought me a file, an old court record. It belonged to my family. My uncles' names were there, legal documents I had never seen before. I read slowly. I discovered something unexpected. They never legally adopted me. They used my existence to justify tax benefits, cheap labor, control. The realization didn't hurt. It clarified. They weren't cruel out of anger. They were cruel out of convenience. I closed the file. That chapter was finished. Months later, I received news. The oldest uncle had passed away. No long illness, no drama, just time catching up. I attended the funeral, not out of obligation, out of closure. People looked surprised to see me there. They whispered. I stood quietly. I felt no anger, only distance. Life had placed us exactly where we belonged. Later that year, I returned to the city where everything began. The road where my parents died. I stood there alone. Cars passed. People hurried. The world did not pause for grief. It never does. I placed my hand over my heart. I didn't become bitter, I whispered. I became better. That was my victory. Not wealth, Not power, but control over myself. In my final public address as CEO, I said something no one expected. Success is not revenge, I said. It is responsibility. I stepped down soon after, not into retirement, into legacy. I built systems that would survive without me, because power that depends on one man is not power. It is weakness. Years later, a young boy visited my office. An orphan, quiet, observant. I saw myself in his eyes. He asked me one question. How did you do it? I knelt to his level. I didn't win by destroying anyone, I said. I won by refusing to stay broken. He nodded. He didn't fully understand. One day, he would. As I look back now, I understand something clearly. The child who cleaned floors became a man who built foundations. The boy who was treated like nothing became proof that nothing is permanent. Pain did not define me. It refined me. And that is the kind of revenge the world cannot take away.